People have read it. What a child that is not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth. Story do you have? I met this kid while in junior high. Knew him his first year in high school. Back in 78-79. Remember the movie Carrie? He had that for a mother. He was super religious and had to pray multiple times a day. Carried a large Bible with his school books. Wore old-fashioned formal clothes, 1950s style haircut, and horn-rimmed glasses. His mother punished him because she saw us talking when he got off the school bus. I guess I didn't pass the friend standard. He was so unsocialized and awkward. He was grateful to speak with anyone. And I didn't make fun of him. I guess it got to be too much. He didn't come back to school for the sophomore year. I later learned that while his mother was sleeping, he doused her with gasoline and set her in the bed on fire. She lived. And they just disappeared. I never heard of him again. Not a village but a woman's marriage. When I was in elementary, I was forced to be in the normal music class instead of the special ed class. I'm going to the proper terms, mainstreamed and assisted because I like them more, for years. Even after my mom and both of my therapists requested that I get put in the assisted class for sensory reasons. I'm autistic and had sensory overloads daily in this class. The teacher said I was lying to them and always did quiet activities when someone sat in on the class. So, I suffered every Monday and Wednesday. I had school from when I was 4 to when I was 10. But then I went to middle school and life moved on. I still loved music, so I tried to join a choir. I was denied for 2 years but got in when I was 12. I'm a pretty good singer and had no other extracurricular activities, so I began helping the choir director. Eventually, he asked me if his daughter, who's also autistic, could be good with music like I was. He says her music teacher in elementary school says she's terrible with music and throws tantrums in class. I say she's most likely not having tantrums but instead having a sensory overload because 38-year-olds playing the recorder at once is hell. Other than a few other questions about his daughter, it's the last I hear of this elementary school music class. A couple of years later, I'm bringing my mom lunch at my old high school. She works there as an assisted class teacher, and I see my old choir director and his daughter. We catch up and eventually, they leave to get lunch together and I chat with my mom. She says, "You know, you're one of the reasons he divorced his wife." I'm like, "What?" And she explained that his ex-wife was the elementary school music teacher, and when I said elementary school music class is sensory hell, he found out she doesn't believe autism exists and thinks you can fix neurodivergent kids by making them so uncomfortable they become normal. Not a good attitude for the mom of an autistic kid. She also refused to take a course on how to teach mainstreamed special needs kids, so she also lost her job. No regrets. I feel bad for OP. 38-year-olds playing recorders is a terrible experience for anyone. I can't imagine having sensory issues and having to be in that room for years. I'm glad the teacher ended up getting fired. Hopefully she doesn't work with kids anymore. A guy I went to high school with burned the bridge with his entire family. We weren't best friends, more of a friend type of situation, so my info is a lot of hearsay. But I do know some things for certain. He was the middle child, with an older sister and a younger brother. His parents had owned a diner and it had been in his family for a few generations. It was an unspoken rule that the kids of each generation would help out when they were little, and eventually take it over to keep it in the family. The problem was none of them wanted anything to do with it. It was the easiest way to set him off, even mentioning it would have him go from 0 to 100 real quick. This didn't stop either of his parents though. They would joke about how the kids didn't need to worry about college, or moving away, and all of that would be taken care of when they would run the dinner. The sister, being the oldest, was the first really pressured into it, but he and his brother told her to get out and don't look back, and don't let them guilt trip you. So, she did, and goes to college on a sports scholarship and then moves a few states away. She occasionally visits but more or less left the town in her rearview mirror. Then it was his turn, but unfortunately, he didn't have the money to get away, so his parents tell him to go to community college and work at the diner to save money. This is where the issues started. The younger brother doesn't go to college and decides to go couch surfing and backpacking across the country for a few years. Occasionally coming back to work for a few weeks when he needed the money, only to take off again. So, my friend gets left running the place, despite swearing he never would. I'd see him around sometimes at bars, and he was a bitter shell of his former self with a bad drinking problem and a series of failed relationships. His parents didn't seem to care that their son was a depressed alcoholic, so long as their family legacy stayed the same. He confided in me how they were pushing him to get married and give them grandkids, to settle down and let go of this silly dream of starting over when he is the diner. Which, given how shit-faced he was in nearly every interaction I had with him, it's impressive he was able to run it. His sister and brother couldn't be bothered to come down and help, and in fact they started to agree with the parents that he should just cut his losses and make this life work for him. One day, he drops off the face of the earth. Nobody sees or hears from him for 3 weeks. His parents say he went on a vacation, and they also hadn't heard from him. Then suddenly he's back in town, seemingly in much better spirits, looking healthier than we had seen him in years. About 2 months later the diner is torn down and replaced with some other business. As it turns out, his girlfriend at the time gave him an ultimatum. Quit drinking and go to therapy or we're done. So, he does, and the therapist points out the obvious things linking to his depression and says he should take a vacation and figure out what else he wants to do with his life. He went to Vegas, partied for 2 weeks, and admittedly thought about killing himself. After getting it out of his system, he devises a plan to sell the diner and pocket the money for himself. Everything was in his name as the owner anyway, so it was pretty easy. He took the best offer he could and used that money to leave town. The brother and sister didn't get a dime, and the parents were already retired. He moved to the other side of the country with his now wife, and we follow each other on social media, but he seems much happier. Apparently, he hasn't spoken a word to his family in years, nor they to him, and does not intend to start. Growing up, our neighbors had a couple boys, 10 and 14 plus at the time of this story. The younger son had a good friend that would stay at their house very frequently. He was always pretty quiet and kept to himself, except when he was with his friend, the 10-year-old, which was when he could be himself. One day we find out that he was permanently moving in with my neighbors due to an unsafe situation at home. Apparently, this poor kid got to watch his mother be murdered by her boyfriend, all because drugs. Right in front of him. The 10-year-old. Luckily my neighbors stepped up and offered to take him in, which was actually great for everyone. He really started to blossom and became pretty stable, with a caveat, he just didn't take any shit from anyone. Which leads us to our terrific act of rebellion. Like everyone else in our neighborhood, we rode the bus home. This kid is riding home from elementary school when the bus driver started going off on the kids for real or imagined indiscretions. Well, this kid takes offense to this and speaks up on behalf of the rest of the kids. Bus driver, now royally pissed, tells this kid one more word and I'm kicking you off the bus. Well, you're correct in your assumption of what transpired next. Kid gets kicked off the bus, which royally pisses him off. So QMC. Kid walks off the bus, and immediately walks in front of the bus. We were about a mile from his normal stop at our street, and this was a 2-lane road with sporadic oncoming traffic. No way the driver could get away with trying to pass, so he drove at a walking pace until the kid got to our street. Parents were wondering where their children were, as everyone was now 30+ minutes late, and were overall very amused when they discovered the cause. Still about the most proud of a 10-year-old I've ever been, and I have 2 of my own. Anyway, I gotta look that guy up. Hope he's well. Man walking in front of the bus for 30 minutes is dedication. Also, how much patience does the bus driver have? Like after 10 minutes, I'd try to get him back on the bus just so we could go faster. On a more serious note, I'm really happy that OP's neighbors were able to give the kid a good home. I can't imagine having something like that happen to me at such a young age. Jim. Not his real name, of course. Anyway, Jim moved to my school in 5th grade. He was socially awkward, but you could tell that he wanted to have friends. But for some reason, he was a complete social pariah. Was it because of his weight? I honestly don't know. It's not like he was the only big boy in the school. But for some reason, Jim got singled out. He was tormented mercilessly. I'll give Jim credit. He took it. But how could that not get to him? Still, he took it. For years. Finally, one kid went too far. In the 8th grade, some asshole accidentally spilled his lunch all over our gym. Jim was sitting by himself, of course. And Randy thought it would be funny to humiliate Jim in the cafeteria. That particular day, the school had served something messy like chicken fried steak or spaghetti or something like that for lunch. Something that gets everywhere if you spill it. And spill it, Randy did. All over Jim. And Jim snapped. I mentioned that Jim was heavy. What that translated to, apparently, was immense physical strength. Nobody had been paying attention all those times in PE when Jim would climb the little rope thing without using his legs to pull himself up. He was a powerhouse, and Randy poked the bear one time too many. Randy's face was a mess of blood and bruises. Jim gave Randy exactly as much mercy as everyone had given him. Which is to say, absolutely zero. Randy's parents filed a lawsuit against the school district, but I have no idea what came out of that. All I know is that Jim and Randy were never seen at the school again. The teachers and principals all understood what Jim was up against. There's no way they didn't know how miserable he was. But school is a lot like prison. The people in authority don't actually care what happens to you. All they want is for your shit to stay off of them. As long as you don't make your problems their problems, they're fine with whatever. So, Jim was left to twist in the wind. As victims always are. A few years after graduation, Jim was in the news. He had robbed a convenience store and then gotten shot to death by the cops. The news coverage mentioned a troubled childhood filled with violence. But I was around for a good bit of his childhood. And on my watch, except for one occasion, the trouble and violence were completely one-sided. Jim couldn't get a fair deal even in death. Even the news media had to pile on. A kid I grew up with in school came from a small town outside the bigger city. It was a close-knit community, very religious, and almost everyone there worked at the same handful of stores in town. He was the thin, short, bespectacled, nerdy, studious, and not religiously indoctrinated child who was ridiculed by that village. He was bullied at school, and I only befriended him because I always stood up against bullies. Fun side story, my parents expected me to get bullied from a young age and sent me to judo at age 4. The bullying was not too bad, but maybe that was because I looked like I could handle myself. I could. Anyway. This kid eventually goes to university to study, leaves the town, finishes his degree, works a few jobs, starts his own company, works his ass off, and sells the company a decade later for what he told me amounted to a little over $150 million. This was around 2014. This didn't happen in the USA, I'm just using freedom money because most of you will understand what value that represents. With money comes attention. Despite being alienated from the village and his family, the beggars came. His family, who disowned him, also decided they deserved the money. I'd love to say, he bought up all the stores, closed all stores, fired everyone, and got his revenge, but that would be too easy and evil. Understandable, perhaps, but no. He did one better. He did exactly that but also bought up about 100 homes. The larger city has a company, IT, with hundreds of employees looking for homes close to work. Those were his market. He sold all the homes to young, highly educated IT people. I am certain he had his own strategic buying out plan where he destroyed the town's culture. A culture built up over many generations, going back at least 800 years. Cemeteries are full of families that have lived there forever, the church that married everyone there. But not anymore. The church is now empty and unused. The only original people still there are the very old folks who'll die in the next decade or two. He still insists that he just saw a business opportunity. And maybe he did. He made his money to make more money, for sure. But he left all the other villages untouched. This was personal. I don't know if my story counts but I'll tell it anyway. I worked as an audiovisual technician for 6 years. I was making $15 per hour. I would sometimes run a crew of 15 people and tell them how to set/strike a room. Even train the new hires in the same position as me. Later I found out the 2 new hires I've been training the past 2 years were making $17 per hour. That's $2 more than what I was making. I wrote a 10-page email to the company's district director on why I was leaving. I put in my 2 weeks notice just as we were about to hit one of our busiest seasons. Heard the clients were pissed that everything was in shambles lol. Should have treated me better. My first new job offer after I left was $42 per hour starting. I'm now a video specialist/camera operator. Scary to think I would have been stuck at my old job if they paid me $2 more. Everything worked out for the better. This kid I went to elementary school with was a foster youth. He was extremely kind to everyone, despite the fact that his life was unbelievably hard. People delude themselves about the system and think it's just a system that fixes kids' lives. Talk to former foster youth and you will find that it's almost never a good thing in a kid's life. Anyway. The teachers at my school genuinely bullied this kid. Like, they treated him completely unfairly. And it was fully classism. For reference, we both had behavior issues and while the way I was treated was not okay at all, I was not demonized the way this kid was. I'd hit someone, I would get in no trouble. He would speak out of turn and get suspended for 2 to 3 weeks. It was rancid how they treated this boy who was just there to learn. Anyway, his teacher suddenly went on leave. She was approved to be a foster mom, and she got chosen to foster a baby. She was over the moon because she couldn't make a baby on her own, and she figured she'd just adopt the baby through foster care. If anyone is unaware of this, this is something that unethical foster parents frequently do, They foster with the hopes of reunification never being able to happen, so they can adopt for free and without a wait list. It's gross. If you look at the stats, reunification comes out on top for the best outcome for the whole family. Praying for a family to break up so you can start one is disgusting. Long story short, her plan was to adopt the baby, but the baby's actual mother was able to get her kid back, thankfully. The teacher was devastated and took a few months off. One of the teachers of our grade talked to us all and explained that she didn't get to keep the kid, so she was very upset, and so we shouldn't bring it up when she comes back. My friend was happy she was gone, because she was his biggest bully. This fact makes me irate because don't be a fucking foster parent if you're not trauma-informed enough to not bully a foster kid for showing normal signs of trauma. Unfortunately, though, she did come back right before we graduated, so the first thing he said to her was, "Hey teacher. How's the kids?" And I've always respected him for it. He deserved the opportunity to throw her exploitation of a system that he never should have had to be subjected to in her face. Infertility does not give you a free license to pray for the downfall of a family. I held a senior position in a corporate job, which allowed me to take on some extra responsibilities for higher pay. It also allowed me to work on projects that I came up with if they were good for the team. It was not my responsibility to code anything, but I knew some basic JavaScript, HTML, and SharePoint workflows / Power BI, which I learned by myself because for some reason none of the other seniors ever cared to learn, nor did the managers either. Long story short, I made several web apps that reduced multiple tasks from 4 to 5 hours to 20 to 30 minutes each and gave my managers actual headaches because of the amount of time it took them. Then one day they turned on me and put me in an action plan for unfair reasons. Action plans are nearly impossible to pass and knew in the end they would fire me, so I coded a dead man switch into all of them where the code would first check for the current date, and if it was after the coded date, then the entire app wouldn't execute any function. I coded different dates into them so it wouldn't look suspicious, the first switch activating approximately 15 days after I left. 15 days later I got a message from my manager panicking, asking if I knew what was happening, to which I responded that who knows, maybe a user permissions thingy and could only check if I looked at the code, which I knew they would never allow. I was friends with an ex-coworker, so over the next few days I would casually mention my apps, and she would confirm that more were failing every other day. Then one day the big one failed. A website that showed a bunch of Power BI graphs that compiled data from different databases to correlate data points and easily find trends, areas of opportunity, individual quality information, dozens of useful filters, and pretty graphics, essential for the manager's bi-weekly reports that only took them a few clicks to filter and screenshot instead of spending an entire day manually doing the graphs on Excel. My manager contacted me again, panicking, asking if I could teach her how to fix it or create a new one. I told her my fee for a consultancy was $30 per hour. That it would take maybe 20 hours to guide her through the process, but probably more, and she would need to pay 50% beforehand. I never heard from her again. This is why you don't mess with the people who design the things your business needs to operate. I always enjoy it when I get to read a story like this one. Anyway, that's all for now. Have an amazing day, and I will see you in the next one.